Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on what time zone you're joining us from. And welcome to this yet another live conversation in our Week of Repair series, which has been taking place since March 21st, last Friday, which was the UN Day of Elimination of Racism. And today is a very special day as we are having some very insightful conversations with some key guests to mark the UN International Day of Remembrance for the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. So welcome everybody. Hello, I would love as we get going if you could just leave a comment and let us know where you're from. As we get going, I'll introduce myself very quickly. Just so you have some context, as well as introduce our special guests. So my name is Brian Royes. I'm based in Kingston, Jamaica on behalf of the Repair Campaign. And I consider myself a young repair advocate, pushing for greater education and awareness about not just the history of where we're coming from, but looking at reparations for where we are trying to go with the Caribbean. That's me in a nutshell, and the guests that we have today, two very special guests. Number one, we have Professor Sonjah Stanley Niaah, the director for the Center for Reparation Research, who's joining us to be talking about education. And we also have a young champion from the Black Curriculum, which is a UK-based organization advocating for educational reform and more Black history education and curricula in schools. And one of their young champions is going to join us today to speak about her experience with the Black curriculum in conversation, with us here in the Caribbean, to see how that conversation on educational repair fits into this broader conversation.
Hi, good morning, Prof. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I am fine. It is wonderful to be here. It is wonderful to be here on this special day as we remember our ancestors. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's been quite a morning, looking at all of the overwhelming support that we're seeing online for this commemorative day, and just taking a moment as well for myself to really consider what does it mean to remember and honor all of the ancestors that came to make me, and that has been my own process of reflection. So that's been awesome. And I'm very eager to get into the conversation with yourself. I think as we wait for our third partner to join us, let's get the conversation going,
Absolutely.
I would love if maybe we could start by asking you to introduce yourself for
Sure.
those of us listening.
So I'm Sonjah Stanley Niaah, culture doctor in the public domain. I've been associated with the University of the West Indies for, oh my God, almost 3 decades. But certainly I started as a student doing things like geography and geology, concerned about the environment. And later on, during the course of my PhD in cultural studies, became embedded in the study of history because I was looking at Jamaican dance hall, the kinds of things that went into the making of Jamaican dance hall, and had to delve deeply into the history. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that, I think, as the conversation comes into maturity. But I've been associated with the University of the West Indies. I'm a teacher. I am from Jamaica. I've lived in Jamaica most of my life, and I'm absolutely very passionate about matters related to reparatory justice.
Mm. I'm interested to learn more about that dancehall connection. I don't know if you want to
Yes,
give our listeners
definitely.
just a little more of a props as to what that entails and how that connects to, you know, from the cultural anthropology to the field of repair. How did that journey look?
Yeah, so I was looking at Jamaican dance hall and interested in the ways in which no space was ever made for entertainment, even though
Mm.
these our ancestors, these Africans who were transported to this part of the world, were constantly celebrating. and they were celebrating in different forms, whether it was to honor the departed, to honor those coming in as newborn, to honor, celebrate a marriage. There was always a context for celebration, even in the face of, abuse, the kinds of suppressive activities, including legislation. So in Jamaica, for example, in 1997, they passed the Noise Abatement Act. And so the suppression around entertainment, whether you look at New Orleans in the American South, in the development of jazz and blues, you look at Kwaito in South Africa, you look at reggaeton, you look all over the African diaspora. What I studied in Jamaica was very much visible in other parts of the African diaspora, because for some reason, whether it was sacred or secular activity, carnival in Trinidad, another example, whether it was sacred or secular activity, there was always a need to suppress what the Africans were doing.
And that joy and that celebration and that spirit of revival that was passed down in the resistance and in their everything. That's quite
Absolutely.
interesting what you think around that.
And they were celebrating in resistance to the kind of suppression they were experiencing. But that's how I came into an understanding of the need for reparatory justice, because here it is, you are really circumscribing how it is people can live and have their being.
Yeah.
You are cutting off their lifeline. Something like celebration is key to one's identity,
And your
You
humanity.
can't live as a human being and not express. This is why we have so much music. I mean, all of the fabulous, I would say, all of the fabulous forms of, the performance practices, the musical genres that have been created, certainly in the last, 200 years, they've come from Black people. They've come from Africans in the diaspora. They've come from Africans on the continent. And so, I saw this fascinating video going around. What if we took everything that the Africans made in the world and just, left everything that, made by other people? There'd be nothing, arguably.
Wow. Yeah. That's fascinating, when you think of that cultural renaissance that hasn't gotten the respect that it needs. And I think that's part and parcel to this conversation on education as well, because even within education, we tend to think book, science, math, English. But what about the cultural education? What about the artistic education that is so important in this conversation,
I will
So
definitely gonna get into that, because it implicates this thing about
absolutely.
STEM versus STEAM.
Which is, I'm a big proponent. Let's go, STEAM. I am very excited to get into this, but I would love to just pause very briefly and welcome our third guest to this conversation.
Yes.
On behalf of the Black Curriculum based in the UK. We have a very special guest, one of the young champions of the Black Curriculum, who participated in their their curriculum program. And hello, welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
Can you guys hear me
Hello.
okay?
We certainly can. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
We're so
Can
excited
you hear
to have
me?
you here.
Yes, perfectly well. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you
Fabulous.
for having me.
Awesome. Would you mind just starting by introducing yourself for all of our listeners who are joining?
Of course. Hello everyone. I'm Mama. I'm 19 and I'm from the UK, and I'm representing the Black Curriculum as part of their Young Champions program. I joined the Young Champions program last year in June, and it's been a very great journey so far. For people who don't know what the Black Curriculum is, we are an enterprise that advocates for Black history and culture to be indoctrinated into the UK curriculum in every single capacity possible, to make sure that young Black people that are going through the education system, as I did previously, see themselves within the content that they're absorbing and know that the UK history does include Black people, and it was built off of a lot of the successes and the struggles of Black people, especially our ancestors that came here before. And yeah.
Amazing, Mama. It's so nice to meet. Congratulations, first of all. I can feel the passion oozing from you as you speak, and I'm so excited to get into this conversation with you, and to learn more about your participation within the Young Champions, within the Black curriculum. Such an important movement. And I'm not sure if you had a chance in the beginning to hear the introductions, but for all those who are just joining again, welcome, welcome, welcome. We have with us as well Professor Sonjah Stanley Niaah, the director of the Center for Reparation Research based in Kingston, Jamaica, and an integral part of this reparations movement and this conversation about educational reform. I am stoked to be moderating this conversation because what I really want to touch on here, we have such an interesting scope of perspectives, right? We have Professor Stanley Niaah, who is an expert in her field, distinguished historian and educator. And we have someone like yourself, Mama, who is a passionate advocate for having Black identity reflected in the curriculum. I want to engage both of you in this conversation about what does it mean to remember our ancestors and to remember, remember our ancestors as we talk about Black history education within the context of repair and this reparation that is required for this historical injustice. So without further ado, let's jump into it. And again, just as a matter of housekeeping for those just joining, this is one conversation in a series of conversations taking place this week during this week of repair. Focus on what does it mean to honor our ancestors. Join us again this evening. If you're still awake in the UK at 11 p.m., please join us in Jamaica. That will be about 6 p.m., where we'll be joined by Fiona Compton from Know Your Caribbean to explore practical ways you can honor your ancestors this March 25th, International Day of Remembrance from the UN. So that's my introduction. Welcome to everybody who I can't wave at in the audience because there's many of you today, which I'm excited to see. But I wonder, Sonjah, would you be able to kick us off by telling us from your perspective and give us some context here? Looking at society, right? We identify there's so many social needs and disparities. I want to get into your mind a little bit. What are some of those social needs that you identify that make it important for us to venerate and remember and honor some of the ancestors who were not just victims, but who were victors who overcame chattel slavery, based on what you see in society today?
You know, Brian, thank you for that question. It is something I think we ought to begin by just focusing inward on who we are as a people and how it is. I can speak certainly for myself. I feel so lost every now and again because I say to myself, who would I have been had I been born on the African continent without any kind of break in my lineage, having an understanding of my community, my spiritual practices, all of the things that come with the sort of, solid foundation of community. Who would I have been had I not been uprooted? Had I not been in the batch of ancestors uprooted from their homes, shuttled across the transatlantic, trade, so-called trading Africans. And so I think let's start there. We know that we've been uprooted. I think there are some things in our societies today, obviously, that tell us that we're still uprooted. The first thing is we're not able, many of us, to trace our ancestors. We can't trace our ancestors. That's a challenge, and it's a challenge for identity because it means we don't know necessarily who we really are. We know we're African descendants. We know we're mixed. In some cases, we know that we have some relationship, but the ways in which we do know that we're African is when the music starts to play and the rhythms start to emerge and we know our bodies are moving even when we have no dance training, right? We know that our bodies are moving in particular ways because we are African descendants. We know we are responding to particular kinds of music. We know also that we are responding to particular kinds of food. And there's a certain rhythm, as Camel Brathwaite talks about it. There's a certain rhythm in the way we move, in the way we talk, in the way we live and have our being. And I think in our society, so the one thing is clearly, the identity, who we are as a people. Some of us are really still not sure. And it makes us ambivalent about even a day like today. Some people feel alienated from the day that is today because they don't relate. They can't relate to, the concept of African ancestors. There is no direct lineage that we can trace and understand. Some people are doing it, genealogy.com. There are all kinds of ways in this, people are doing this kind of genealogy testing, but that's not open to the majority of us. So there is that in the social landscape. Many persons are still walking around with ambivalence about who they are. I think the second thing I would want to identify is that, and I think our UK colleagues can certainly identify as well, that our education system is still colonial.
Mm-hmm.
To a large extent, our education remains colonial, serving the needs of those who need people coming out of school who want to work for someone else.
Right.
That means we're not being geared towards critical thinking. We're not being geared towards ownership. We're not being geared towards building society. We're being geared towards development as really another kind of enslaved person. And so I would want to suggest that the society tells us that the education system is not serving us for proper leadership and visioning of the societies we want to build. I think the third thing I would want to say finally is that there are all of these symptoms that then emanate from this kind of an ambivalence about who we are and the education system that's not serving us. What are these symptoms? They manifest in all kinds of deviant behaviors. So criminal activities, violent activities, the things that continue to alienate us from ourselves even further and from our communities. And I can speak certainly in the UK, knife crimes. In Jamaica, we can talk about femicide, a lot of ways in which men are in fact taking the lives of women, even as much as they are taking the lives of men, other men. But we do have a challenge. We have a challenge. And that stems, Brian, I am saying that stems from a lack of centeredness about who we are as a people. Our education system that's not serving us. And therefore the lack of understanding as to how it is we must take care of community and family.
So it all comes back to identity and an understanding of self in the context of which we came.
Absolutely.
If I'm hearing it correctly. That was an excellent and very comprehensive. Thank you for that, Prof. You really spelled out some excellent points there. I'm curious, Mama, what does it look like in the UK for you? How do you see the need for this?
Or I would say, I've just come out of the education system maybe 2 years ago. I'm in my second year of university now. And looking at the education system that I experience, I don't know if it's changed in the last 2 years, highly doubt it. We have the curriculum review in the UK that's about to come out, so we'll see if those changes that the Black curriculum has been pushing for have been implemented. But what I would say is that I completely agree with all of your points. I think that you summarized it completely, and it very much is the same in the UK. There is a lack of focus of the Black identity, whether it be the Black British identity, whether it be the Black African identity, the Black Caribbean identity as well. And I was recently speaking to a co-worker at my old school, because I've gone back now to see how it is. And she is Jamaican, and she was educating me, and I don't know much. I put my hands up. Since joining the Black curriculum, I've learned so much more about my own history, but she was telling me more about how the system used to be. And looking at the system now, the education that I experienced, I did history at GCSE. The only part of Black history that we learned at history was American Black civil history,
Really?
which I'm not saying it's not important at all. I'm not saying that, of course, the civil rights movement in America did wonders for raising awareness about Black people everywhere. However, Black Caribbean, especially Black British Caribbeans, contributed so much to the foundation of the UK.
Absolutely.
So much, and paved the way for a lot of every single minority, every single intricacy of the Black identity in the UK. And that is not reflected at all. You have cultural days, which is like, in my opinion, is a cop-out of like certain schools in predominantly ethnic minority areas that try to say, oh no, we're embracing your culture, we're trying to educate you about your culture. However, I cannot tell you anything that I learned about the Black British identity, the Black African identity, or Black Caribbean identity through my government-led education. I went to a state school my whole entire life. I never went to a private school, and I can't imagine that it would be any better there. So the need for the Black identity to be implemented in the curriculum is so dire, because you can't tell me that there are many other Black young children that go through the history curriculum. There's no mention of what their grandparents might have done. We have so many hidden and ignored activists that have gone through the system and have done so much for the Black people in the UK, completely ignored. I went maybe, I think last month or something, in honor of Black History Month. I actually know last year I went to this unveiling for Olive Morris, who was a young activist who did so much for squatters' rights and for Black people in the UK, and starting one of the most profound institutions that helped activize Black people's rights in the UK. Why was it until my 19 years of age that I'm learning about her and how much she did, when her contributions were maybe 30 minutes away from me? I'm from North London. She was based mainly in South London, and all of her attributes are based in South London. The disparities are astounding, and it's honestly appalling to see that we have an increasing number of Black young people going through the system, and you wonder, like I'm saying this as to the government, you wonder why they're not engaging with the curriculum when it does nothing to serve them. It has nothing about them at all, like at all. If it's not for like my personality type of never wanting to honestly be quiet or be positive and learning about things, I was that kid in school that always said why, like, okay, but how and why?
Good.
Like, so if it wasn't for those inquiries, I would not know more about myself. And if it wasn't for those teachers that I had in those leadership positions, I was in a privileged position that even though the curriculum wasn't reflective of my identity, my teachers were. And they would sit down in their own time and tell me about my history. And
Wow.
I am so appreciative for them, but that is not something that they should do off their own backs and not being paid for it. Majority of the time during Black History Month, we had times in lunchtime that our teachers would just sit down with us and talk about all the different intersectionalities of our identities, what it means to be Black and African at the same time. Especially for me, my mum's an immigrant. She came here when she was 18. For her to tell me about her history coming from Gambia and making sure that I have that connection to my homeland, regardless of being born and raised here. So I just think that, honestly, if I could put into words what the UK curriculum does for Black people in general, I would be honestly, for the first time in my life, speechless, because it does nothing. It does nothing. To be so frank, it only invigorates people to want to take a stand and want to get into positions like myself to make sure that we can change it for those to come, and to make sure that the government knows that we're not taking this lying down as well. Yeah.
Incredible. What a powerful answer. I loved what you said there. For the first time, I would be speechless. I think that's so salient. So you kind of answered what I wanted to ask as a follow-up question there, which is, if not through the school curriculum, how does one develop a sense of this Black consciousness that we are talking about? And you have mentioned it there, but I guess this is an open question for either of our guests here. But if not through the education, what are some other ways that currently exist or that you would want to see more of to instill this sense of Black conscious identity in our young people?
I would say, if I can speak, in the UK, it's mainly our communities. I think especially in London, there is such a strong Black community wherever you go. if it be in north, east, west, south London, you'll find a Black community. And for me, whether that be after school, I went to my local youth club, and everybody looked like one another. We had so many young Black children there, and the youth workers were also Black. And in an area that had so much crime going on and was in the center of the community, which meant we were in a very vulnerable position. Every single other day, like you would hear about a stabbing going on, maybe down up in Enfield, maybe down just around the school in general, maybe at the doorstep of the school as well, which is obviously unfortunate, but that is the reality that we live in. But having that community and having that youth center where they would constantly have cultural days focusing on not just Black culture, which is not a thing. I think it's important to delve into the intricacies of it and separate it from one another, because at the end of the day, I
Okay.
think that is a cop out for the government to come and say, oh yeah, no, but we are doing something for Black people. But what type of Black people are you doing something for? Because this is
Mm,
not what any one of the communities are asking for. You know what I mean?
mm,
So we had cultural days where we focused on one specific aspect of Black identities and seeing what struggles we may face, and having that education of what struggles I may face as a young Black person going through the UK, going from society to society, where in London very inclusive, but other parts of the UK maybe not. I can only speak for
yeah,
London because that's where I grew up, but speaking to fellow young activists as well, they did not have the experience that I did. They didn't have the community that I did. And it's very isolating to want to speak out about something that no one else pays mind to. Um, and I think if it's not for the communities that we have in London, I think it needs to be, we see more policymakers that look like us taking an interest in matters that regard us as well. Thankfully, in this government, as we're seeing now, um, there are a lot more policymakers that are inviting uh, in companies like the Black Curriculum to come in and speak about what is important and what we'd like to see from the education system. Whether or not that will be implemented, I don't know, but I am a bit more hopeful as time goes on.
absolutely. It takes a community to raise a child is the famous saying that you hear, but even more so, a child in a society that doesn't see themselves reflected, even more so. Thank you for that powerful answer. And you touched on something there too, which I'm excited to hear Prof comment on, because it's this idea that education is not just for the classroom, right? That education
Absolutely.
takes place
Mm-hmm.
in communities, in families. Prof, I don't know if you want to expand on that, coming from your background
Sure.
within cultural anthropology, within the Jamaican context or any context you like to take it.
Yeah. My own cultural studies, which is about really the politics of it all, you know. But I want to say two things. One is that we ought not to let our leaders off the hook.
Yes.
Many of us are paying a lot of money in taxes. Collectively, we are living in these societies, in a sense, holding allegiance to these societies. Many of us could go elsewhere. We are living in hope within these societies, but these societies, certainly from the standpoint of the leadership, they are not serving us. And I think we ought not to let the leadership off the hook.
Mm,
What we're talking about a lot in terms of the, whether it's Jamaica Day, some kind of cultural day, they are all over the place, but they are only aesthetic. They are only aesthetic in terms of their impact. So, we have relegated the celebration of who we are as a people to one day, an observance in terms of an aesthetic kind of response.
mm,
And that's not satisfactory at all. It's not serving us. That's the first thing. The second thing is, yes, in terms of the ways in which we have sought to retain, because we are having this conversation precisely because there are ways in which we have retained memory, we have retained the capacity to honor our ancestors, and we are doing it whether collectively or at the personal or individual level. And I want to say that there is an internal space that we have not, touched on yet in the conversation, where each of us, as African descended people, we are hearing that higher self speaking to us about what is valuable, about what is, important in terms of honoring who we are. Many of us are not listening because, of course, there isn't a social landscape that's an ecology then, a structure that supports this. But in some communities, there are structures, and I want to particularly reference the Rastafari community all over the African diaspora now, which has been the kind of memory of the people of African descent all over the world, trying to remind them about who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so, whether it is the Rastas who, you see people, you see them representing with their hair, their natural hair, attempts at natural living, the attempts at remembering those ancestors important, Marcus Garvey, His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie, those persons who have been examples to Blacks, right? Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and so on. We must remember them, and we must remember them not in a superficial aesthetic sense.
Yeah.
We must remember them in ways that honor the kind of work that they have done. That means holding space to remember them every day. That's not a cultural day thing. That's not a Martin Luther King Day thing. And, sadly in Jamaica, we don't even have an official day for Marcus Garvey, even though we celebrate Marcus Garvey's birthday and so on. There isn't a holiday. There isn't an observance. And the fact is, we're not even teaching about Marcus Garvey in schools in Jamaica. Some people outside of Jamaica know more about Marcus Garvey than people inside of Jamaica. And this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, the ambivalence that we have with ourselves means that we are not even focused on the kinds of things that we need to be able to get out of the kind of crisis we are in as societies.
Powerful. And baking that into the lived experience, not just on one day, as you said, but to have that be a part of our consciousness throughout. I think the commemorative days are a nice way to sprinkle the calendar with, key events for sure. But the fact that Garvey is not taught in schools, that feels like a no-brainer.
Absolutely.
In the Caribbean.
Absolutely. It's a challenge, and that's a leadership question. That's not me and you going to, the Minister of Education to say why is Garvey not being taught in school. They're not going to listen to us necessarily. But the very University of the West Indies in which I work, we have suggested at various policy levels, whether it is Jamaican language, to put it in a place of pride, where students who come into the school system without Jamaican as a first language, that they can have a bridge to English. Whether it is teaching Marcus Garvey in schools, there are so many things related to our identity. See, recently in Jamaica, for example, we have just gotten revivalism and the pilgrimage to Wat Town inscribed as an element on UNESCO's list of intangible heritage. These are the kinds of things I'm talking about, that we have to almost do what Rwanda did, not just with the laws, repealing the colonial laws that don't serve us, but we have to get deep into who we are and reverse the things that were done to us systematically. And that requires a certain kind of leadership and consciousness and vision. So when I say we are not to let our leaders off the hook, we mustn't let them off the hook at all.
Absolutely. What you're touching on there, it's interesting that it overlaps in basically virtually every way with what you see in the demands for reparation and repair. This idea of repair, again, which implies a disconnection, implies there was a state before that has since been broken and is now in need of repair, I think is fundamental to this conversation. And as we've touched on, education, right? In reference to the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparations, which is an excellent framework that outlines, these categories or these areas within which this repair needs to take place for those of us who are listening. Education is a fundamental component in that. More so, African knowledge programs and cultural exchange programs are central to that. Memorialization, which is something that is deeper than just, let's put up a statue. or let's have a plaque or something, which is absolutely important, but memorialization in a deeper sense, which relates to that reconnection to oneself through seeing yourself reflected in these histories, is part of the CARICOM 10-point plan and is part of this call for repair. So I'm glad that you touched on all those things there, Prof. Because this is not a conversation that can happen in isolation, but it connects to virtually every facet of society that we're looking at here.
Yep.
I just want to take a quick pause and say welcome to everyone who has joined. We're thrilled to have everybody in the comment section, and we'd love to get to know you as well. If you're in the comments, if you can just drop a comment saying where you are from, so we can understand who we have here and talk to you guys as we talk to each other. If you're from the Caribbean, drop your flag. If you're from the UK, which part of the UK are you from? If you're from the United States, other parts of Europe, let us know. We're really glad to have you here as we commemorate today, March 25th, as UN International Day of Remembrance for the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. It's a mouthful, that title, but it's a very important thing. As you said, Prof, that this is not just a one-day event, that we can't just relegate the act of remembrance to one day. And so that leads into my next question for you guys. Oh, welcome, Akeem from Neverland and from the UK and Canada. Awesome. Good to see you guys. Welcome. This leads into my next question for you, which is to expand the conversation on remembrance outside of just one day. What are some ways that we can, remember our ancestors in our very everyday lives as March 25th, becomes yesterday and we move on? How do we adopt a posture of remembrance that is built into sort of who we are? And I'm curious to know from you, Mama, what this looks like within the UK, because this is a context that's totally unfamiliar to me. I've only been to the UK once when I was like 10 years old. And so, it might touch on memorialization, it might touch on the music and communities, but from a personal level is really what I'd like to get at here. What does it mean to you to honor your ancestors and remember them?
That is a very good question.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it goes down to everything that I do in a day. And for my ancestors, luckily, like I have been blessed with the opportunity to go back home to Gambia so much. I've been a couple of times, and my bloodline is quite traceable. And in Gambia, especially, even though we did suffer with slavery, we honor it in a way that isn't, I guess, painful anymore, if that makes sense. Essentially, we look at the sacrifices that our ancestors have done to make sure that we can be where we are today. A lot of Gambians have left Gambia and come to the UK, all around the world, but we all come down to the fact that, and the way that I embody it is being the change that I know my ancestors would have wanted to see. And even in this society now, like I can't be quiet. I can't be quiet for nothing, even with my friends, even when I'm doing activism like this, and when I go and meet policymakers, I will talk their ear off, because I think that is the change that my ancestors would have wanted to have seen, and that would have, like, essentially, I don't want to become a part of a system that wouldn't have protected the rights of my ancestors, the rights that they did not have. And I think, especially in the UK, a lot of young Black people are really trying to hold on to every single ounce of their being when it comes to their ethnicities. Especially for my friends, I have friends from all over Africa and all over the Caribbean, but we sit down with each other and try to teach each other parts of our culture to make sure that we're not losing it. And I think that is such an important way to embody your culture and take it forward with you. Because when you move to a different place, I'm London born and raised, and it's such a big part of my culture, and I'm not ashamed of being from the UK. But of course, I look at what the UK has done to my country, and I'm not proud of it, and I speak out about it. And knowing that everything that my country has gone through has gotten me here, I can't turn my back on those who are still there and my ancestors and their sacrifices and what they've done for me. And at being an activist and embodying what I would want to see in the system now, and making sure that all of these changes I'm advocating for, not just within the UK, but also can benefit the Gambia in the future. It's a beautiful country. We call it the smiling coast of Africa. And every single part of my personality and the way I carry myself has to embody those values. Being hospitable, being kind, and being inclusive of everybody, no matter where they come from, no matter faith, religion, gender identity, sexuality, whatever it may be. That is what being a Gambian means. And that is something I have to carry forth in every single thing I do.
Can I just say I'm so inspired by you? I literally have goosebumps hearing you talk. You are the generation that we need, and I'm so excited that you exist. So I'm just in awe of what you said there. You can't turn your back on the sacrifices of your ancestors, and you be the person that you would want them to be. I think is absolutely so powerful and so critical. If all of our young people could adopt a perspective like you, imagine the kind of renaissance, the cultural revolution that could be incited, that can be incited, and will be incited because we're speaking things into being, right? Thank you. Honestly, thank you for that answer, Prof. I don't know if you have any response
I
to that.
really want to say, Brian, that, Mama, it is my wish that you at 19 years old would be representative of the average 19-year-old across the African diaspora,
Yes.
instead of you being an outlier. And this is what this conversation is about. Whatever it is that went into the formation of your own identity, your own confidence, your own purpose, the definition of purpose that you have just identified for us is not average, is not the average identified by the 19-year-olds across the African diaspora. So how do we produce Mama and reproduce Mama in every 19-year-old across the African diaspora? And for me,
Excellent.
that is the question, and it's not that difficult. There are some things that went into your own formation. Yes, you happen to have had the foundation of parents from the continent with a certain consciousness of what the history was, what the history made them, what the history made them have to become. And then there are things such as the education you got, your opportunity to go to university. Why isn't that average? Why isn't that the norm?
Exactly.
You're telling me.
Let's just think about that.
I have no idea, and I want to pick up on the fact of, like, even though I have gone through the education system and it came with its joys and it came with its lows, and the lows were definitely part of the character building of the person I'm becoming today and the person I'm trying to evolve to become. But I would say that any of the UK folk that are on here right now listening in or might see this later on, I would say that it's so important to not turn your back on everything that made you. Because regardless, you can join, like, for example, I'm at university, but we're talking about our future careers and what we want to do. You can join the corporate system, but if that corporate system turns their back on, oh, you wearing your afro to work as unprofessional, or you having a bit of an accent as their little part to play in diversity, equity, and inclusion in hiring you, you are not breaking the system. You are breaking yourself to fit into that system. And that is not, I personally couldn't do it. I'm studying international relations and Arabic at university, and I go to one of the most quote unquote liberal universities in London. But it is so important to me that when looking at my future job prospects, I am not breaking my spirit, not breaking who I am as a person, not breaking what my mum, as a single mum, went through so much to raise me in this country just to fit a mold that was never designed for me, and I don't ever want to fit it. Because young people nowadays, we either see it as like make or break. You either have to completely abandon your heritage, which of course no one wants to be in that position. And I honestly sympathize with a lot of young people who have to make that decision because we're all just trying to survive, to be honest. And this is not me calling out anyone in that way, but if you are conscious of it and you now are out of that position that you were initially in the system, and you now have like the blessing of changing the system and making it more, holding the door open for other people. Like there will be a point that I reach 25, and apparently in the UK that is not considered a young person anymore. I want to argue about that, but but I will reach a point that I'm no longer a young person. I can't speak from a young person's perspective, and I honestly don't want to have to. Like, I want to hold the door open for every other young activist that has to come in this space, and know that at the end of the day, the opportunities that were afforded to me have to be afforded to you, and not just because you're Black, not just because you have you come from an immigrant background, but also because of the person that you are, and the fact that your race and your ethnic background has now become something larger than yourself and larger than what people see from you. Yeah, honestly, I think there is a lot to be done. I don't even know where to start. I think having spaces where young Black people feel comfortable and safe enough and secure enough in their identities to spread that around, because it took a lot for me to become. I hated the fact that I was Gambian when I was younger, to be completely honest with you.
Really?
Because the system that you grow up in doesn't create a space where that difference in ethnicity is welcomed
Or
um
celebrated?
and at the end of the day, yeah, to be honest, like there in where I live, there was the only 3 Gambians that were in my school were my cousins. So at the end of the day, like, it wasn't an inclusive space, and I personally went through a lot of bullying and went through a lot of different, like, troubles about my identity, and did not enjoy being Gambian because it made me different. And it took a long way for me to come to a point that I embrace the fact that I'm Gambian, embrace the fact that I'm Black, embrace the fact that all of my different identities have empowered me to be in the position I am today, and realizing that it was never a weakness. It was just something that threatened other people because I was secure in who I am, and
Wow,
that
yes.
became larger than myself, and it obviously radiated and made some people feel inferior, and that's not my problem.
That's
At
not
the
your
end of the
problem.
day, like,
Not at
I
all.
have to represent the people back home. Gambia is a very small country. It's the smallest country on mainland Africa, I think. And I want to make sure that in every single way, I represent my country in a way that everybody will be proud, and my ancestors will be proud looking down upon me. So,
That's
And you hear
fantastic.
the confidence with which Mama can talk about her ancestors. This is not what we have
Mm,
in the African diaspora at all.
I
And
was
the other thing I
just thinking
wanted to
that.
highlight, something important you said, Mama, is, you talked earlier about the teachers who you either interrogated or they took the interest in you enough to want to share with you things perhaps even outside of the curriculum. And that's important. And I want to highlight that as much as we spend a lot of time at home with parents, some of us, we spend a lot of time at school. And this is why the education system is so critical. That our teachers all over the African diaspora need to be retrained, because they themselves, if they are not clear about who they are, how can they instill or guide or share appropriately in relation to this identity that we must solidify as
That's right.
African diasporans, who must be able to honor our ancestors, understand who they are, understand what they suffered, understand how they triumphed, and understand our purpose in making sure that they are the people, they are the ones who we honor every day.
Absolutely.
absolutely,
How can you teach
yeah.
something that you don't yourself understand or embody
Exactly,
or believe?
exactly. They have to be retrained.
Yeah. So you're speaking
100%.
towards a key need here in this conversation on educational repair, which is not just what we teach, but also who is doing the teaching, right? And that twofold, I'm sure it's more than two. I mean, even that threefold, because now you're talking about making education accessible, so, right? So increasing the access for those who might not already have access. So there's multiple dimensions, more than just twofold,
Multiple
that
dimensions,
go
because I
into
can also
this idea of
insert the
repair.
fact that the institutions themselves in some ways need to change as well, need to introspect, need to look at themselves and
Yeah,
take stock of what it is they are not doing wrong,
yeah.
not doing right.
What the right? Yeah. So this conversation on repair is how I mean, as we sort of come to a conclusion to this conversation, I want to bring into to frame this idea of reparation, and what does this notion of repair mean in light of certainly this, you know, this UN commemorative date, but in light of what we've talked about this whole conversation about infusing a sense of Black consciousness, Black conscious identity, pride in our ancestral lineage into the systems which are not serving us. And what role does reparation, whether internal or external, looking to others, what role does that play? And what would you like to see happen in the near future as it relates to that? Broad question, I know. I guess shoot in any direction that you feel so inclined.
I'd
Would you like to
definitely
start?
like to see us embody the revolutionary spirit and potential of a Marcus Garvey, a Sam
Yeah.
Sharp, Paul Bogle, you know, Martin Luther King, you know, Claudia, uh, in the UK, she started Notting Hill
Claudia Jones.
Carnival. Uh, yes, Claudia Jones. I want us to embody the revolutionary spirit of all of those, Sojourner Truth, all of those, Rosalie, you know, it's Rosa Parks. We need to be able to educate ourselves about them and to embody their spirit on a daily basis.
Mm,
This is what is going to take us into the purpose that we're talking about. That's going to solidify how it is we move step by step with repair internally, inside our institutions, inside our families, inside our communities, to understand who we are. We've got to teach ourselves about who we are.
mm. I would honestly say, I'm trying to think of a way to put it in. For the UK, I honestly don't think reparations is the right word, because reparations implies that obviously there was something and then it's broken. The UK curriculum as it stands right now does not recognize, especially when teaching their students, does not recognize the part that it had to play within slavery. And you will not be you are not educated on it. There's maybe in year 8, I'm trying to rack my brain on whether or not I was taught this, but I'm pretty sure in year 8 we had maybe a couple of classes about slavery. And one story that I will never forget is the fact that we were watching Roots. And I think any person that's from the UK understand and has gone through the system has understands watching Roots,
Jamaica,
watching 12 Years a Slave.
same over here.
Yeah, so you guys understand that is the, like, I guess the standard of education on slavery. And I remember watching that, and then after my teacher at the time was like, oh, now we're going to learn the language of like the slaves, like what they spoke. And I was looking, he put sheets on our table, and it's sheets of like, oh, how you say how are you, hello. And I'm looking at it and it looks very familiar to me, all for me to say out loud. And I realized that is my like language, because Gambia is
Creole, yes.
yeah, it's put into tribes, and the language was Mandinka, and I speak Mandinka quite well. So I'm looking, and I put my hand up and I was like, sir, I this is my language. Why is this the language of the slaves? And I did not know, like, at the time I was not aware of like Gambia's history with slavery, and only for me to now realize that Gambia was, if you look at Gambia on the map, just to divert the conversation a little bit, if you look at Gambia on the map, it's very peculiar on how it's shaped. It's surrounded by Senegal. It looks kind of like this. Senegal's completely surrounding it, and I found out that the reason why Gambia looks the way that it did is because the British wanted it for the River Gambia to export slaves. So that was my introduction into education of surrounding slavery. But to go back to your question on like the reparations, to be honest, as it stands right now, the UK does not have anything to repair for, because there was nothing that existed. And it's now a matter of indoctrinating it into the curriculum to make sure that there is something to work with. There's nothing tangible for us to work with, especially, maybe it has changed. Honestly, I'm 2 years out of the system, but
It
from what I hear,
Hasn't
it's
changed.
only gotten worse. It hasn't. I'm trying to give them some leeway, but honestly, it hasn't changed, to be completely frank. But that is the biggest problem now, bringing something in, and that is what we activize about at the Black curriculum, and especially referring to a previous point about teachers being secure within their identity to help young Black children coming through the system feel more safe in their identities. That is what we advise about at the Black curriculum as well, providing those resources to educate teachers either of ethnic minority backgrounds, but also white teachers, because at the end of the day, they do dominate the teaching workforce. And it is so important that at the end of, like, you can't teach a young Black student about their history if you are not completely secure on it yourself, regardless of what your ethnic background may be. And the biggest call to action within the UK is to put something in there and work with the people who have come out of the system, the people who are in the system, having young Black students that are currently doing their A levels, doing their GCSEs, doing their SATs, tell you about what they want to see, reflecting on their educational experiences as well. Because I don't want any other young Black student to go through the system where they feel isolated, where they feel ashamed of their ethnic backgrounds. And that is the biggest part. That is maybe the only form of reparations that they can now do, because our government has promised us a lot, especially in regards to education. The education system here is failing young Black people so much, and they wonder why the crime rates are so high. At the end of the day, if you want to solve crime, you go to the root of the issue, which is what support are young Black people getting in the education system. And to say that crime is wholly due to race is another problem, another issue for another day. But
Absolutely.
you have to look at what space you are creating for every single different student that comes through the system. At the end of the day, this system right now only serves the typical white British student, and that is it. Not even, I wouldn't even say white as in immigrants that have come in, white immigrants that have come into the UK as well. I think we're all not being represented, but at the end of the day, race is a big part of it, and they can feel some type of inclusion due to their race, whereas Black people and brown people and Asian people don't feel any type of inclusion because our history is not being reflected. It never was. The apologies that we need from the British government for slavery. Have you guys, I don't know if you guys have heard of one of our lines in the UK being renamed the Windrush line. After the whole Windrush scandal that happened in the UK, our Home Secretary, who essentially put majority of the Windrush generation through hell, excuse my language, through hell, burning their documents, burning any legitimacy of their stay for anyone that came during the Windrush period.
Yeah,
and
the scandal.
What we have as a form of reparations in the UK is one of our overground lines being named the Windrush line to honour that part of our history.
Going back
So,
to the aesthetic response that I've been talking
Right.
about.
so the biggest part that we need right now is to be not just heard and dismissed, but to be heard, understood, and included. Having a conversation without comprehension is just talking for talking's sake. And honestly, we've done enough talking. We need action from both ends, and we need young Black people to see that action come from their communities, to see that we're not being dismissive, we're not giving up. We are consistently activizing about things that we care about and things that we need to see within the system as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so powerful. Thank you for that so much. And I think that's a good segue in as you're talking about how can we take action. I just want to plug those who are listening at the moment that in light of the increased momentum behind the Caribbean's reparations movement, we're asking anyone who has heard the call to stand in solidarity with the calls for reparations and repair for the Caribbean, for the over 350 years of genocidal exploitation that has taken place, for which there has since been no justice or apology. And as we've identified in this conversation, the need for repair, especially within education, is great. And so if you're listening, we invite you to sign in solidarity with the calls for repair using the link in the bio at Repair Campaign up here. And also, if you comment the word repair in the chat, our system will automatically send you a link to sign in solidarity. We are eagerly looking to see if we can identify and quantify, where are our reparation advocates? Can we stand in solidarity, especially not in a superficial or aesthetic way in light of March 25th, which is this day of remembrance, but in an internalized way? What does it mean to remember our ancestors and their legacy? Those of us, with Caribbean heritage, their legacy of resisting and overthrowing the system of chattel slavery, and how that legacy and that spirit of indomitable defiance, I messed the word, indomitable defiance, still lives on in our very DNA in this present day moment. And what do we, as you say, what do we owe our ancestors in not turning our backs on them as we turn our sights to the future of repair and of development for the Caribbean? And in particular, I want to add, in terms of the relationship between the Caribbean and the UK, the Caribbean and global Africa, those of us living in the UK. And I think this concept of solidarity is going to be crucial, because, as you say, it is not just an African issue. It is not just a Jamaican issue. It is an issue that is interconnected and affects everyone. Slavery was not something that ended hundreds of years ago and we've moved on from, but the legacies of it influence and pervade our society in every way, right? And so even if someone is saying, oh, but my ancestors were not enslaved, you can still sign in solidarity, recognizing that the system of enslavement has had ripple effects, has had global shaping effects. And so we're asking you to sign in solidarity using this link here to support the reparations movement that is in a very pivotal moment in 2025. So all that said, I just want to say thank you to everybody in the audience for being here. Are there any closing? As we look towards wrapping up, can I just ask you both, what would you like to leave our listeners with? Are there any final comments or thoughts in light of this day of remembrance, in light of repair, in light of honoring our ancestors? What can you leave us with as we close?
I think the one thing I would want to say, very, very briefly, very, very short, succinct, and to the point, most of all, remember who you are.
Remember who you are.
Remember who you are. Because that's going to guide us into where we come from, the people who made us who we are, the shoulders on which we stand, those who can inspire us. Remember who you truly are.
100%. Mama, anything from you?
I would echo that same sentiment, but honestly, to all of the young Black people across everywhere, wherever you may be, remembering that even though the system, wherever you may be, may not represent who you are and the struggles of your ancestors and the struggles of your families and your friends, remembering that if you turn your back on the struggles of your ancestors, you're no better than them, and they will only see you for surface level, for your skin color and for your accent, for your hair, like all these superficial details that we know our identities are so much more beyond, but that's all they see you for. So my biggest message is that embody everything that your ancestors went through within your character, the way you carry yourself, everything that you do, and let that be the meaning. If you have no meaning and you're struggling, as young people, we go through so many different phases, we try to figure ourselves out, but find yourself within your history, because you will always feel at home, you will always feel welcomed, and you'll always feel included and seen. Find yourself within your history and make sure that other people can also look to you and find a friend in you if they look like you, or even if they don't. Educate people around you and don't let the struggles of our ancestors just stop within you being like, oh, I'm just not going to talk about it anymore. Like it's a political issue or it's a trivial issue. No, it's an issue that's integral to your very being. And that is something that needs to be said. Anything that you have to say about your culture is not wasted words. Make sure that people hear about it and make sure that people understand you when you speak.
Wow, that was so powerfully said, perfectly said. I couldn't have said it better myself. I just want to say thank you to you both so much from the sincerest part of my being for being a part of this conversation. You don't know, but your words go far and wide. You have no idea who your message has inspired today. And even as those who might not even be in the live are listening afterwards, your sentiments are inspiring people that you don't even know you're inspiring. So thank you. I just want to acknowledge some of the comments as well. People are saying beautifully said, we are our ancestors. Let's make them proud. Hashtag resistance. Culture Doctor, we appreciate you. Find yourself within your history. Ashe. I love you guys. Fan moment for Culture Doctor. I love you like cook food. I always reference your work. Rafiki's advice, a good old African proverb, remember who you are. That's a Lion King reference for Rafiki there. Can you say hello, Katie? It's my birthday and I love you guys. Hi, Katie.
Hi,
Bohemian Vampire says, I
Katie.
enjoyed reading this conversation. I enjoyed hearing this conversation, sorry. And I'll stop right there. But just to say that we're really grateful for the engagement in the comments as well. Please stay tuned. Join us again this evening for the final conversation in our week of repair, which takes place at 6 p.m. Jamaica time, 11 o'clock if you're in the UK, 7 p.m. if you're on the East Coast of the Caribbean or the USA, as we commemorate what it means to honor our ancestors in a practical way with Fiona Compton from Know Your Caribbean. Remember to sign in solidarity using the link in bio, comment repair, and we'll send you the link. And follow each of us at Culture Doctor, at the Black Curriculum. Mama, if you want to plug your own handle down there so we can connect with you personally, we'd love to keep in touch after this. Follow at Repair Campaign as we continue to explore what does it mean to honor ancestral legacies and resistance the entire week of repair. So all that being said, thank you everyone around the table once more. And Mama has just dropped her Instagram handle for everyone to unfollow.
Thank you so much. This has been awesome.
It's been such
Blessings
a blessing
to everyone.
Mm-hmm. And stay tuned for what the Black Curriculum has coming up as well, and stay in touch with every single one of you guys on here. Yes. I hope you guys have a lovely day.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Blessings.